was indirectly some bad news for Newcastle United in their striker search yesterday, as Yoan Vissa's price was set extremely high at £50 million. In this video we're going to be looking at potential alternatives and also what Newcastle may be looking for in their search for a new frontman. Let's get into it. Hello, welcome back to my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for joining me once again. If you haven't already, please do subscribe. Over 3,500 views on yesterday's video, 20 more subscribers as well. So thank you to everybody who's joined in the last 24 hours. Hit like on this video to help it grow. Today we're going to be looking at the striker situation again. There's not really much fresh news to talk about with Newcastle United. Anthony Elanga is still, at this time of recording, waiting to be announced. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just it takes time, especially in the modern era where clubs have to one-up each other with their announcement videos. It's not just a case of holding up the scarf in front of the East Stand anymore and that being enough. You have to do loads of different content things. Again, maybe by the time you're watching this, maybe by the time I finish recording, maybe while I'm recording, he'll be announced. But as of right now, he hasn't been. We're going to be looking at, as I mentioned in the intro, Yoan Vissa's price tag, because he emerged as a potential option for Newcastle. And again, just want to stress that it is only a potential option. It's not much more than that at this stage. He's been mentioned as a player Newcastle United could move for because he fits the bill in terms of what they're looking for in terms of a versatile striker. But Nottingham Forest, as I mentioned in the video when we discussed him the other day, bid for him in January. Now they look like they could be going back in for him because they've got money to spend, with obviously the money from Elanga going for 55 million. Since that's happened, Morgan Gibbs-White looks set to join Tottenham for 60 million after that release clause was activated by the London club. So Forest have a lot of money to spend. Brentford have apparently, according to David Ornstein, put a £50 million price tag on his head, which would make it almost impossible, I would say, for Newcastle to enter that race, because Newcastle have a certain budget. There are a couple of things we are going to discuss. I've got a couple of options that Newcastle could look at with different price ranges as well later in the video. But yeah, I just think in terms of 28 years old, 1 year on his contract, Newcastle will be looking to do that deal at around maximum £30 million, I would imagine. The fact that Brentford are starting at 50 means that it's very unlikely that a conversation could even get off the ground. Again, this is all speculation. There's no movements been made. Again, there's complications with Vissa, given that I don't think Brentford are willing to let him and Brian Mbeumo leave. Newcastle may well have to go back to the drawing board pretty quickly on this one. But before we get into talking about the potential other options that I have on this list, let's break it down in terms of what we know Newcastle are chasing, what we know Newcastle have done to this stage, and where we think they may go based on educated information. So we know that Newcastle want a striker to compete with Isak, to play alongside Isak, who's versatile and can play in other roles, maybe a number 10, maybe out wide, various different things. Is predominantly a number 9, but can also do different roles. What have they done? They've bid for João Pedro £50 million, which suggests that they have quite a lot of money earmarked for this role, potentially. They're willing to spend on the right player. Again, I don't think they have a specific budget. I think if the right player comes along, that's the way Newcastle have always worked. João Pedro being a long-term target is somebody that they absolutely wanted, so they were ready to go for. Maybe if the right price for Hugo Ekitike comes available this summer and the opportunity arises, they may stretch themselves a little bit there. But generally, I think because they want a centre-back, because they want a goalkeeper as well, they have to be mindful on how much they spend depending on the profile of the player. Again, it's not that they have a specific way of doing things in mind, it's to do with the player themselves. So they were probably willing to push the boat out more for João Pedro, given that he's such a long-term target and Eddie Howe has wanted him for quite a while. The same with Hugo Ekitike, the same with a number of other players who've been previously linked, than they would be with a potentially a new name. But we know that Newcastle need a forward who is versatile but also scores goals, does different things, and is of the right profile. The evidence of going for Vissa and Watkins, which was mentioned, is that Newcastle maybe are willing to forego the age restriction that they've got on other targets who, it was really, really paramount that Anthony Elanga was the right age. It's really paramount that the centre-back will be the right age. But the substitute striker or the backup option up front, not necessarily as crucial. But we do have certain players in mind for this role with different valuations on their heads. We're going to start with the top valuation of the player that I think Newcastle could look at or should look at for a striker. This is a really bold suggestion, don't get me wrong. He scored 26 goals last season for Benfica, 19 in the Portuguese League, 7 impressively in the Champions League, which is really, really interesting. And that is Vangelis Pavlidis. A couple of people in the comment section have asked me about him and whether Newcastle could move. He's just over 6 foot tall. He can play in a second striker role and he can play on the left as well. Look at these FB ref stats. All of these green lines, incredible. 96th percentile for non-penalty goals, 98th percentile for expected non-penalty goals, shot creating actions, 94th percentile, touches 96th percentile, successful take-ons 92nd percentile, 85th percentile for progressive carries, progressive passes 82nd percentile, assists 96th percentile, shots total 89th percentile. So his stats reflect his versatility, his ability to link into play and get involved. He works extremely hard. He's a great finisher. He's physically ready for the Premier League as well. I think this one would be an excellent signing. Virtually impossible to do in terms of the price because he's got a contract till 2029 at Benfica. He only signed a 5-year deal last summer, had this brilliant breakout season there. It would probably cost the sharp end of whatever budget Newcastle had to pay for him, but I think if you're looking for game-changing signings in the forward areas for the Champions League, proven players, Pavlidis is absolutely ready for that. But again, the context of that is that the money is the problem with Newcastle because they don't necessarily have that to spend on anybody. It's just whether that player is the right one. And Pavlidis has been tentatively linked. I'm sure Newcastle have got an eye on him. I'm sure they're aware of him. But I just don't see this one actually happening. But, let me know in the comment section what you think. I know a couple of people have mentioned his name to me. So I said I would do a little bit of a profile on him at some stage. And it feels like the kind of player who would solve a lot of problems, instantly coming in to have an impact. He earns about £55,000 a week at Benfica. So wage structure-wise wouldn't be too much of a problem. But the cost that he would incur from a Benfica perspective, because their club is built on selling for huge fees. You've seen them do that with João Felix for 126 million, 85 million pounds on Darwin Núñez, various others as well. So I think Newcastle would run into a brick wall if they tried to sign Pavlidis. I don't think this one would happen, but in an ideal world, and if they were looking for a premium Champions League ready target, then Pavlidis would be the one I would go for. On the other end of the spectrum, I think someone who's really interesting and very affordable and might be the right type of profile Newcastle should go for with centre-back and goalkeeper in mind as well is Evann Guessand from Nice. Last season he scored 12 goals with 8 assists, 24 years of age, 6'2" tall as well, physically ready for the Premier League, can play across the front three crucially. His FB rep stats aren't nearly as impressive as Pavlidis's, as you would expect. Non-penalty goals, the 84th percentile, 82nd percentile for expected non-penalty goals, 70th percentile for successful take-ons. But again, look at the tackles, 78th percentile for tackles, 75th percentile for interceptions. Aerial duels won 80th percentile as well. Well-rounded, around 25 million euros is his valuation according to transfermarket.com. I would think you could do this for around 30, and that would be interesting to see if that would work. We've mentioned so many other possible strikers as well. Moise Kean over the last few weeks. Omega back in sort of May time as well. He would sort of feel like that sort of price range of striker, maybe slightly cheaper. He's been linked with Fulham and Wolves in recent weeks. But profile-wise, value-wise, and the fact that he's scored so many goals in Ligue 1 last season, he would be worth a look. He's the right profile, can play across the front three, as I said. Physically ready, good finisher. I think Eddie Howe could really work with him, but it's about, crucially again, I'm going to mention Liga, and we've spoken about Mikatadze, we spoke about Omega, as I said, we spoke about Bakwa as well at Strasbourg as decent options from Ligue 1 because of the financial situation. that would be a big plus in Guessand's column. Newcastle are looking at potential options from abroad. The fact that this deal could be done for a very, very realistic price range is something that I think should be considered, but let me know what you think. And finally, the other sort of slightly more riskier, I think, and rogue suggestion I had was Mohamed Amoura from Wolfsburg, joined from Union Saint-Gilloise in Belgium, where he scored 23 goals in 48 games. He's then scored 10 goals with 9 assists in the Bundesliga last year for Wolfsburg, and his numbers are backed up by very good underlying FBref stats as well. Assists 98%, shot creating actions 81st percentile, passes attempted 90th percentile, progressive carries 95th percentile, 91st percentile for successful take-ons, 99th percentile for blocks, 81st percentile for interceptions, 86th percentile for tackles. So again, well-rounded, hard-working forward who defends well from the front. He's diminutive in stature, 170 centimetres, so maybe not, maybe questionable on the physical side, but in terms of his output, his underlying stats, his work ethic, his quality on the ball, the fact that he can play again in a deeper role as well, that number 10 position, and up front and out wide on the left, really suggests to me that he could be somebody that would be worth looking at. 25 years old. The point I'm trying to make again, and I've made it so many times on various different videos, Newcastle need to be creative at certain points in the market if they are to get all the players that they want. They were looking at high-end players because, I understand that to improve a Champions League squad and to be ready for the Premier League and to be ready to go, you need to have players who are of the level. And, Ante Elanga certainly looks that way. Giorgio Scalvini or Mark Gahey, whoever they're chasing at centre-back, looks that way, with high hopes for James Trafford in goal. But at some stage, you've got to take a few risks. These players aren't necessarily unknown, they're not unproven. 10 goals, 9 assists for Amoura last season in the Bundesliga is a really good return off the back of growth in the Belgian league. Pavlidis absolutely bossing it in the Champions League for Benfica, and is a really, really intelligent footballer. And, Guessand as well. Nice are not exactly a poor side, and he's done really well. 20 goal contributions for him in League last season. The pressure on this player wouldn't be as vast as it is on Elanga or as it is on the centre-back to deliver immediately. They'd have Isak to play behind, they'd have Isak to learn off, and that can be a positive for these players. Not necessarily Pavlidis. I think he is unlikely to join in that regard because he's already a starter at the Champions League level. It would be a massive plus for Newcastle in terms of the quality that he would bring, and he would play a lot of games. And I think this is the thing to remember, that whoever comes in, Newcastle are going to play 55 to 60 games possibly next season if they go deep in all of the cup competitions. So there's a real opportunity for all of these players on this list to play a lot of games. But it's about the optics of it, and I don't think that Pavlidis is likely. I didn't have them on the list when I came to sort of first thinking about this video, but because of the bid for João Pedro and the idea that Newcastle can maybe bring some money forward from a January budget or prospective January budget, perhaps if the money was there, then somebody of that ilk would be on the list. So I mentioned his name, but I think Newcastle, as I sort of said in the other video about Vissa, that they are looking at maybe being a little bit more sensible with the pricing of this deal to keep money back more to go big on a centre-back, and obviously the James Trafford deal, which is still in the pipeline as well. And just a little bit of fun from me on today's video, but I wanted to explore and explain and analyse what Newcastle are looking for in a striker, because it's very, very difficult to think about a player or a load of players who fit the bill of the right level. That's a very difficult market to go into. You have to take a couple of risks, and there are a couple of risks on that list. There are plenty of other players we've talked about before as well. My ideal target, if I could get anybody in, as I said earlier in the summer, was Moise Kean, because he's powerful, he can play out wide, he can drop deep. He's very much similar to Callum Wilson in his physique. If it was up to me, that's what Newcastle would be going for. But by the looks of things, they're looking for someone a little bit more versatile. So I've taken a look at a couple of different options. Thanks so much for joining me on today's episode and this week's episodes. I'll be back on Monday with another one. Like, share and subscribe as always, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.